First of all, thank you very much for sitting down to talk about Scott Pilgrim 10 years past its release.
Maybe 10 and a half. Time has gone elastic with the pandemic.
Scott Pilgrim at 10 years. I'm going to start with the hard-hitting stuff that the fans would have wanted to know. Why did you wait a decade to get Brie Larson's cover of Black Sheep released?
It's an easy answer, is because initially, when we did the soundtrack, Metric wanted to have their version on the soundtrack. And because it's their song, it was absolutely fair. It was like going to be on a soundtrack. And they asked, we would prefer that our version was on the soundtrack. So it was as simple as that.
For the record, I am so pissed off for you right now.
Shut the f***, Julie.
So I wasn't going to contest that, and I thought it was only fair to like Emily Haynes, who wrote the song, that she should have her version on the soundtrack. And her version is great too. So then when the idea that ABCO approached me about doing a box set soundtrack for the 10th anniversary, I said, if we don't have the Brie Larson Black Sheep cover, there's no point in doing it. I said, because people give me such shit over the years, like, why won't you release that version?
Oh, I heard that so much.
And I never really wanted to answer. I said, it's like Metric wanted their version on the soundtrack. So I called Emily Haynes and I said, this is going to seem so crazy, but 10 years later, is it okay if we have the Brie Larson version on the soundtrack as well as the Metric one? So the new soundtrack has both versions of it. And she was like, oh yeah, sure. So, they were like totally fine about it because now it's on there twice. So it's like, and so, yeah. So the new soundtrack that I think just came out, somebody texted me today that said that they got their copy before I did. I don't even have my copy yet, but it has that on it and some other stuff as well, which is like, because there was such a treasure trove of stuff. Like one of the things that's on the album that hasn't previously been released was I had this demo of Beck working out the Ramona song, and he basically just like improvises like 5 different versions of that Ramona song. And just hearing him kind of just do it straight to tape, just kind of like noodling and working it out, I asked Beck, I said, hey, is it okay to just put all of these on? Because it's fascinating. So there's a lot of good stuff on there.
Can't wait to hear it when it's finished.
Finished?
That's just sort of the lo-fi aesthetic that the musical end sort of embodied in those soundtracks. But on the other end of the spectrum, in very high fidelity, Scott Pilgrim's coming back to theaters in Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. Was it always the plan to go back to movie theaters?
No, you know what? So kind of what happened was I knew that like sort of, even though the film, when it came out like 10 years ago, it didn't do as well as everybody was hoping. I knew that like at Universal itself, it had a lot of fans. And in particular, like, a lot of people really loved the movie and were as disappointed as I was that it didn't do that well on initial release. But very quickly, it sort of started to become a cult item. It started to play like midnights almost immediately. Like before the end of the year, it was kind of like playing a lot of midnights and stuff. And so over the years, like, I think that, you could see by the kind of the amount of merchandise and the number of Blu-ray reissues, or like just that there was kind of like a demand for Scott Pilgrim stuff. And Michael Moses, who's like, was then the head of marketing and is now like a sort of one of the top dogs at Universal, we'd always kept in touch about it. And he'd actually, on the Monday after the film came out, when kind of just for my mental health, I decided not to read any of the box office like trades that weekend. He sent me this amazing email that was one of the best emails I've ever received by somebody that's, in the film industry. All it said is, it just said, years, not days. That's just what it said, years, not days. And I was like, yeah, I agree. And I said, I know, because most of my favorite films were like, flops on the initial release. Blade Runner, The Thing, Big Trouble in Little China. Like, there's like, loads and loads of them. Ones that people now think like, oh wait, The Thing wasn't a hit when it came out. No, it was number 8 and dropped out of the top 10 the next week. So anyway, so I knew that there was like a lot of fondness for the film, you know, occasionally people at the studio would be saying, is there anything else we can do with Scott Pilgrim? You know, trying to figure out a way to sort of like, what else could we do with it? So there've been various discussions of like what to do with it in different mediums over the years and things that still might play out. But so I sort of said to him, like, why don't you re-release it for the 10th anniversary, since everybody in this cast has become a megastar since? And he said, let me get back to you on that. And then Michael Moser got back in touch and said, Dolby Cinema and AMC would like to re-release it. And I said, you know, and we'll do a new Dolby Cinema version. So it was, you know, the people at Universal, AMC, and Dolby Cinema that basically said, we want to do this. So after that, it made my job pretty easy in that all I really had to do was kind of approve the finished thing. And the fortunate thing is that maybe unlike a lot of like remasters of movies, all of the people involved in the movie I was still working with. So, you know, Julian Slater, who mixed Scott Pilgrim, was working with me on Soho at that time. And then Bill Pope, the DP, and the original colorist, Stephen Nakamura, and then also Paul Matchless, who edited Scott Pilgrim, co-edited it, and is editing Soho as well. So we were all working, so we were able to kind of like basically do this as well. And so the great thing is that people like Julian Slater and Stephen Nakamura are at the top of their game. So I had no qualms about leaving it with them. And it was like, so they remastered in Dolby Atmos from the original stems, and he, you know, did the amazing 4K version of it. So then I just had to watch it. So like last year, I guess before Christmas, whilst I was finishing up 2 other movies, Sparks Brothers and Last Night in Soho, one afternoon I had to go and watch Scott Pilgrim as well. And I sat in the Dolby Cinema in Soho Square, and I was like, oh my God, it just looks incredible. And it is that one of those things of watching a film from 11 years ago that I just watch it and I go like, how the hell did we do that? Like, and not to sort of brag, because I could say this more about the work of Bill Pope and Double Negative and Fraser Churchill, who did the visual effects. I don't really know what I would do differently now, like visually. I don't really know how you could make it look like better than it does, which is an unusual thing to say about a film that's 10 years old, because I don't know how I would better the visual effects or the kind of the look of the movie. So for me, just watching it like at that remove and watching it again better than it's ever looked and sounded before, I was like, okay, wow, great. Like, I'm down.
I'm in Lesbians with you.
Is there any particular scene that you're looking forward to fans rediscovering through this new cleaned up cut?
I think one of my favorite sequences in the movie, which is one that like maybe like there are other bits of the film that are more famous, but I always think that the kind of like, for me, my favorite fight scene in the movie is the Roxy fight with Mae Whitman in the nightclub, where like Ramona and Roxy are fighting.
Kick her in the balls!
'Cause I think we shot that, I mean, I might be wrong, but I remember that we shot that in like 4 days. And when I watched that sequence again, I was like, how did we shoot this in 4 days? It looks amazing. Like, because I think the lighting and the photography and the visual effects in that sequence are just like astonishing. And like, you know, the girls are so great and the choreography is really great. And Nigel Godrich's score in that sequence is amazing. So, I mean, I'm really like happy with the whole thing, but that's one sort of sequence that whenever it comes up, I'm like, oh, this looks great. It's fantastic.
Obviously.
It is kind of hard to pick a favorite at times, but just personally, I'm waiting for Threshold. I cannot wait to watch Threshold again on a big screen.
Okay, I'm getting tingles.
Good. I mean, listen, it's I'm just happy. You know, it's a very nice thing. What's interesting about this movie is, and I've become more aware of this recently, is that there are the people who saw it and loved it at the time. There are people who then discovered it like afterwards, either like at home or watching it in like rep screenings. And then more recently, I've become very aware of like that people's kids like it. And I know that because I get asked to sign Scott Pilgrim posters for people's children all the time. and quite a lot from like directors. So it's even like, you know, or directors or stars like sort of you know, Sam Mendes, J.J. Abrams, like Jon Favreau, Jack Black the other day saying, "Oh, will you sign a Scott Pilgrim poster for my son?" So that's a really nice sign, because it's like, oh, it's not just kind of like you or I, you know, kind of like talking about a film that came out 10 years ago. There's a generation who were not old enough to see it at the time, who are really enjoying it, and that's amazing. So, and I got that feeling when I posted the trailer, you know, the news about the re-release. Quite a few people said, "Oh my God, I never saw this at the cinema at the time. I'm so excited." So it's great. And also weirdly, even though it's not really the 10th anniversary, it's like 10 and a half. Like coming out now as you know, like I'm a big kind of supporter of this cinematic experience, and you know, and Last Night in Soho has a Dolby Cinema version as well, or certainly Dolby Atmos at least. It's definitely Dolby Atmos. It is a Dolby Cinema. It's definitely Dolby Atmos. Don't quote me on that. So actually coming out now as people are sort of coming back to the theaters, and also that theaters need our support, it's very kind of encouraging to me seeing that like Kong versus Godzilla did like what it did with only like 50% of the seats or less. And I think there's obviously like as the vaccine gets around and people feel safer about coming back to cinemas, and that there is like a sort of an enormous percentage of the population and the film world who miss going to the cinema. You know, if Scott Pilgrim is like a film that people are like, "Oh, I can't wait to go back to the cinema to see this." And it's funny, like, I got lots of nice responses with people saying, "This is going to be the first film I see in a year." And it's like, well, that's great. I'm happy to help.
It's just nice, you know, it's just simple.
It really just speaks to the enduring quality of Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And that kind of leads me to something that I've always wanted to ask you about. Right before Michael Bacall gave you the ending to his book, as well as the fact that, you know, Fate and Test Screenings kind of intervened to get Ramona and Scott together in the end, you had shot an ending with Scott and Knives ending up together. Looking back, which ending do you prefer?
Oh, I prefer the version the new version. I prefer the version that went out. I think this is what happened, is that Brian Lee O'Malley, by the time that me and Michael started working on the screenplay, there were like 3 books out. And I remember me and Michael Bacall, the co-screenwriter, went to Toronto to hang out with Brian and sort of pick his brains on what the rest of it was. And he had outlines for the other 3 books. And so we knew what the outlines were, and there were things that were in there that we wrote into the script, which then Brian didn't end up doing in the comics. Like there was one thing that was in there that was neither in the comics nor in the finished film, but was in the script and wasn't the storyboards at one point. It was one point Gideon was going to turn into Mecha Gideon.
Music to my ear holes.
And then that was the one thing where the budget was like, there was a point where it was like, can we do without the giant robot? Like, can we get rid of that bit? So we came up with the ending like that it currently is, which I'm really happy with.
I've got no beef with you.
So what happened is that, so we're making the movie, Brian is carrying on with the books, and then, you know, his book 6 is different from our film, but is also different from the outlines that we worked on, which is totally fine. And I had no problem with that, because I felt like, well, this is an adaptation and these things are kind of like going their different way, and like one thing is the book and one thing is the film, and that's totally fine.
So I guess it all shakes out, huh?
The thing is that the ending that we'd originally done, where he ended up with knives, we had originally written that to be a little like the endings of The Graduate or The Heartbreak Kid, which have these slightly kind of bittersweet, enigmatic endings, where in both films, like the hero gets what he wants, but is it what he really needs? And so you're left with a question mark. It's like, maybe I did the wrong thing. Now, that we wrote that, but then as we came to film that, it didn't feel right. And the reason it didn't feel right is Ellen Wong is like the most adorable, charming kind of actress, and Knives Chow was such an adorable, charming character. The ending if it felt in any way cruel to her, it just wasn't right.
That poor angel.
So we didn't really shoot what we'd written because it didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. And so I think the original ending sort of had a slightly kind of like uneasy quality where it was neither one thing nor the other. And but we test screened it, and so it would sort of, that particular ending would split people down the middle. Some people would like it, and some people would say, wait, I sat through like nearly 2 hours for like Scott to not end up with Ramona. What the hell? Or like, you know, or sometimes, you know, I remember vividly in the sort of the penultimate test screening we did, there was one person in a focus group who put their hand up, this young woman put her hand up and said, I love this movie. I love every frame in it. I love every character. I really, really, really don't like that ending. In this screening, we'd scored like 81, which is good. But like, and I think Universal thought that I was just gonna be stubborn and saying, that's it, that's the movie. Okay, some people don't like the ending, fine, it's divisive, something to talk about, let's move on. But I went away and it was nagging at me. And I think I showed it to I remember showing it to J.J. Abrams. And it was the first time I said it out loud. I was saying, I've been thinking about doing a new ending. And he said, what would you do? And I said, well, I think maybe it would be not that he ends up with a Ramona, but like he gets a second chance. And he goes, why don't you write it and see how it feels? So that weekend, I emailed Michael Bacall and Brian Lee O'Malley and said, hey, let's think, if we did a new ending, what would it be? And we sort of kind of basically kicked around this one final draft file and wrote the ending as it currently is. But it was Brian Lee O'Malley who wrote, I think the key line is Knives' line, which is,
I'm too cool for you anyway.
and I think that was the thing. When he wrote that, I said, that's it. That's the line, because it's like, you can't have the movie end badly for Knives. You've got to let Knives like end kind of like proudly, like sort of like with a sense of pride, and the idea that she's kind of like matured beyond Scott.
You're too good for him. Run.
So when Brian wrote that line, I was like, that's it. And then also, I didn't want it to be like a super happy ending in the sense of like that they're going to go off and get married. He's just asking for a second chance at a first date. So they go through the door again, almost like the film's going to start again, and like he's going to do it right this time. But I was most nervous then about calling Ellen Wong and telling her that there was going to be a new ending where she wasn't going to end up with Scott. And I was really, really nervous about this, because obviously like she's a sort of an Asian American actress, Asian Canadian rather, in a film, and sort of saying like, hey, you're not going to end up with the guy at the end of the movie. So I was really nervous about calling her. And then I told her what the scene was over the phone. She goes, oh, that's much better. Because I was going to say that, like, I don't think Knives would get back together with him after he cheated on her. and as soon as she said that, I said, oh, as she said, I think it's better because it's like, she's kind of like, she's too cool for him. I love that line. And I was like, great, done.
Ciao, Knives.
Go.
So that was really like sort of, and I think that's the thing is, I think it's actually Knives letting him go is the key to it. And Brian's line,
I'm too cool for you anyway,
is the key to that scene. So I even though it's interesting to see the old ending, and I like the music that's in the old ending a little bit, even though I think that's maybe on the new soundtrack actually as well. The theatrical ending is the one for me. I think it's like it's spiritually the right ending, and to have Brian back to write it, and to have Ellen's blessing that she thought it was better than the original ending, I was like, great, okay, good.
That's just like a perfect
It was
story.
done very close to the wire. It was shot in May before it came out in August. And I think, like I said, Universal weren't expecting me to change it. And I remember, like, after we'd written it, I emailed Donna Langley with an email that said, surprise ending. And I said, I've been thinking about it over the weekend. What about if we shot this? And then we went, and so it came out in August, but we shot, and what Comic-Con was in July, but we shot it in May. So we shot in May, and we had to like finish that scene. And it was so close to the wire that I think there were even some critic screenings or early online buzz screenings where it was with the original ending. So then some people, when they saw it in release, were like, wait, when did you change the ending? Like, you know.
You pulled a clue on the universe.
Yes. But there's not a glimmer of me that thinks that the other one was better.
You weren't wronged?
I think sometimes and listen, not all films get to do it, like, but usually like reshoots is considered like a dirty word. But sometimes if you've got a studio behind you that will pay for you to go and do a couple more days of filming, it isn't until you've made the film that you really understand what the ending should be. So it's that thing. So I knew that when we were shooting, I knew that there was something that was not quite right about the ending that we'd shot, but I didn't know what it was. I couldn't be that surgical about it. You have to almost like, I mean, a lot of filmmakers kind of are sort of so down on the test screening process that somehow it's kind of like lowering themselves to even show it to an audience. But sometimes you have to show it to the audience for them to tell you what the ending should be. And this was one of those cases where it's like, I knew it wasn't right, or it could be better, and I had to kind of go away. But it was funny, like JJ, like playing my shrink. It's not like he told me, he said, if you did write it, what would it be? And I said, maybe something like this. He goes, why don't you write it and see how it feels? Like, so it was like being my psychiatrist. Anyway.
He just randomly pops up in people's offices during the edit. It's like, how do you feel? Like he's really taken that Star Wars thing to heart.
Those filmmakers who you can sort of call up, like sort of, you know, like Ask Jeeves, are like worth their weight in gold. I've been very lucky to be able to call on like George Miller recently, who is like, I mean, George Miller is a doctor, and he's also like kind of the best like script editor, or like somebody to watch a cut, or like sort of suggest something. And I don't know how he finds the time, but like he's been so helpful to me recently, where I even sometimes I'm saying like, hey, I know you're busy making a movie, but do you have time to watch this new edit I did? And he goes, oh yeah, it's great. What if you just change that? I said, that's a great idea. And then I go into the edit saying, so George Miller suggested.
He's famous and he talked to me.
But listen, I would like to be that person for a young filmmaker in 10 years time, 20 years time.
I think we're running up on time, so I just want to throw in like kind of a last sort of curveball question. You are an experienced adapter of material from the page to the screen, but if you could novelize any of your favorite movies, which one would you sign up for in a heartbeat?
Novelize?
Yeah, because I've just been on Novelizations lately, because it's something that's kind of, it feels like it's coming back, especially because now Quentin Tarantino's got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood coming out as a novelization.
Yes, I've read one of the chapters of that, and it was extraordinary. I haven't read the whole thing, but he sent me one chapter of it.
Okay, I'm jealous.
Which is something that's not in the film at all, but is just like, I can see, I think with Quentin as well, like it's like perfect for him, because like, I think when he finishes a film, he's not done with it, in the sense of like, he's so in love with those characters, he wants to hang out with those characters for longer. And you notice that a lot of times when he makes movies, he sort of says, hey, I'm going to do a sequel to this, or I'm thinking of doing a spin-off with these characters. It's because it's like, I think it's tough for him to say goodbye to those characters. So I'm really looking forward to reading the whole thing. But the one chapter that I read about Cliff was extraordinary. I guess it's coming out soon, so other people will enjoy it too. To answer your question though, I mean, weirdly enough, I think probably the new one would be the best novelization, because sometimes I wrote the story for Last Night in Soho, and then I wrote the screenplay with Krista Wilson-Cairns, who wrote 1917 with Sam Mendes, who's amazing.
Amazing writer.
You know, when we were like watching the movie, I did say a couple of times, I said, it feels like the film of a book that doesn't exist, in a nice way. Like, because there are lots of those, you know, you used to have a lot of times in kind of like, you know, used to have much more thrillers and horrors and genre films that were like adapted from like paperbacks, and it sort of feels a bit like that. So I mean, we did talk about at some point trying to do that, but like I don't know if that will happen before it comes out. Let me say this, I doubt it will, but I would say Last Night in Soho would probably be the best novelization.
Even if you do it after the film drops in theaters, that just, I want that book. I need that book.
Big fan.
Why wouldn't you be?
I used to be a big fan of the Doctor Who novelizations. I used to have many of those books, and it was always kind of a bummer to eventually see the episode, and it was like what you saw in your head when you were reading the Doctor Who novelization and what the BBC effects department could do at the time with two different things. So sometimes I kind of, and weirdly enough, there's one Doctor Who novelization which is maybe one of the slight germs of an idea for The World's End. But I'd never actually seen the episode until after The World's End, but I had read the book. It's one called The Android Invasion. It's a Tom Baker episode. And what's weird is in the 70s Doctor Who episodes, there's lots of 70s Doctor Who episodes where they're ripping off Quatermass and Hammer movies. So weirdly, there's a film by Terence Fisher called The Earth Dies Screaming, which is almost exactly the same plot as The Android Invasion, like 10 years later. But I had seen The Earth Dies Screaming, but I had not seen The Android Invasion, but I had read the book. So I'm with you. I haven't read a novelization for a long time, but also when I was a kid, I used to read novelizations for films I was not allowed to go and see.
Yeah.
I read the Alan Dean Foster Alien and Aliens before I saw the movie because I was too young to see the movie.
Yeah, that's you talk to a lot of film geeks in our generation. That's just sort of the gateway into those stories. It's like, well, I think it was, I forget who it was, but there was a film critic that once said on a podcast, my parents wouldn't let me see certain movies, but reading was not out of the question.
Yeah, I was the same. When I went to see Gremlins when I was 10, Gremlins was a 15 in the UK, and me and my brother were so mad that it was a 15 because I was 10 and he was 12. And we just thought, how the hell can we get into Gremlins? And it's a bit different in the UK. You can't do that trick where you can get a parent to take you, a guardian. You have to be the age. So I went to the cinema manager with a copy of the Gremlins novelization. And I said to the cinema manager, I'm 10 years old. And I say, we want to see Gremlins, and we know it's a 15, but we won't be scared because we've already read the book and we know the ending. And he looked around and it was quiet. It was a matinee. It was quiet. He said, get in there. Like, so I saw it. But he amazingly, that guy let us through. He was like, go on, get in there. We had to pay adult prices and he let us in. So that was amazing.
That's how they get you.
I guess I have to go.
Yeah. Edgar, thank you so much for not only just making a film like Scott Pilgrim versus the World, but talking to me about it. I cannot wait to jump into the theater and see this new print. Best of luck with everything. And let's do this again for the Sparks Brothers and Last Night in Soho.
Great. Sounds good.
Bye and stuff.